Quiet as it's kept, the manufacturing sector is exploding. It is exploding, generating 13.5 trillion, that's trillion with a T, annual global revenue, and on track to reach 19.52 trillion by 2028. There's a huge opportunity for a new manufacturing leader to emerge. Yep, you heard it right here. That's what I'm saying. Considering that outdated systems are commonplace, the playing field for innovation around digital transformation is wide open for an industry innovator to burst in as a industry forerunner. So I couldn't think of a person better to talk about this than my colleague that I have as a special guest today. Well, wait a minute. Who am I? I'm Kylie Alexander, your host and creator of 100 Days of Service Now, and I wanted to talk about the manufacturing sector. There was some talk about this at Knowledge, and I wanted to double click on that on this episode, the week following Knowledge. So without further ado, I want to welcome my colleague, Solutions Sales Consultant Mark Harper, to 100 Days of Service Now. Mark, welcome to the stream.
Oh, what an intro. Yeah, that's quite impressive. And I think you laid out the opportunity that's in front of us excellently well. But yeah, thank you for inviting me on to the show. I'm happy to discuss everything ServiceNow manufacturing.
Wonderful. You know, in our conversations, you have a really clear view of some of the main challenges that are facing the sector, and you even have some really good thoughts about some solutions. So hey, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself, and then we can start to get into those challenges and solutions that we've talked about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So my name is Mark Harper. I'm a solutions sales consultant on the GlideFast side. So I work closely with our customers and our prospective customers, trying to get a sense of what it is that they're trying to achieve with the ServiceNow platform, and then trying to get them to a solution that's providing that level of value. And so I've been on the platform for about 9 years now, working originally on the delivery side, working with CMDBs with all kinds of different industries and sectors, and then just progressed and grown with ServiceNow as ServiceNow has grown itself. And throughout that journey, I've been exposed to all kinds of customers from healthcare, finance, and then of late, been doing a lot of work with a lot in the manufacturing sector and utilities, as well as the industries that's producing products as well.
Sure. Yeah, and your customers, have a lot of really great positive things to say about you and the outcomes that they've experienced. So I'm really happy that you were able to make some time so that we can kind of, give a high level view of like what you've experienced out there in the wild, so to speak. So let's get into it if you don't mind.
Let's kick it off.
All right. So you talk about the top three challenges facing the manufacturing sector, and the first one you talk about is poor visibility. What does that mean?
Yeah, so essentially, like a lot of times when I'm working with people in the manufacturing sector, it feels a bit like I'm going back in time. It's like talking to people within IT 10, 15 years ago, where we have all of these siloed, disparate systems and no true understanding of everything working together. And
Sure.
that's understandable because in the manufacturing arena, when you're working with operational technology and those assets, it can be a little bit more difficult to query them remotely, using things like the standard automation tools to get that visibility into the OT estate. So it's understandable why we're still relying predominantly on spreadsheets and different groups working very much independently. But that's where ServiceNow can come to the table with the capabilities of like the OTM offering to try and build that consolidated view into what my OT estate looks like, what the processes are made up with from an OT asset, and
Sure.
allows them that to become a system of action that we can help address some of those issues that's being experienced within the manufacturing sector.
Right. And I know that we're going to talk a little bit more about your view of those top solutions in a bit. I appreciate you kind of giving an overview of what poor visibility looks like. I really connected with what you said when you said talking and working with some of the manufacturing customers out there, that is sort of like going back in time, right? And you compared it to working with IT organizations maybe a decade or more ago, and how and that's why I think that there's such a runway for a manufacturing leader to emerge. So it's actually quite exciting to be in the manufacturing field right now, in my view.
Completely agree. Like we've got past this, bury our head in the sand and just hope everything is going to continue to work effectively. There's too many exposure points in the industry for that to be applied. So that's why we need to try and get ahead of this poor visibility challenge and move forward with solutions.
Definitely, definitely. Let's talk about the second of the top three challenges facing the manufacturing sector. And you say that it's loss of knowledge. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I mean, in IT, we've gone through like this digital transformation, and with like Industry 4.0, there's similar effects. That's like moving downstream into manufacturing. And but what we're often finding is when people sort of move on from an organization or maybe hit the retirement date, they may be working on that plant in that substation for 30 plus years.
Yeah.
They know it inside and out, but it's not always documented. We don't really know what kind of incidents and issues, work orders are done against a certain OT asset. Some guy, some individual may know that because that's what they've been doing for their entire career. But once that individual may move on, we lose all of that tribal knowledge. And
Mm.
that's why we're trying to reduce that risk of relying on those superstars that have been keeping together for many, many years to try and put it into a tool like a ServiceNow where we can have that documented history of all of those OT assets and how they're all working together. So it's really about risk mitigation from that loss of knowledge as people look to potentially move on and retire.
Sure. I imagine that in working with customers that part of the work that you do is to get those internal organizational folks to really get on board, those superstars within those manufacturing organizations to get on board with the digital transformation that you propose. How do you kind of navigate what may be some resistance? Maybe their superstardom is based on having this amassed this knowledge.
Yeah, no, I mean, sometimes it can be that political challenge. You
Yeah.
really have to frame it in what's going to be a benefit to themselves. And a lot of that is going to be trying to reduce some of that bureaucratic overhead that they may now be expected to perform. A bit like that, bury the head in the sand. We don't really have that ability anymore because regulatory compliance is really pushing us forward or pulling us forward. I
Yeah.
really should say. So they no longer can just pretend we're not going to document anything. There is that requirement of that being put in place. So it's really us trying to make their lives a little bit easier with some of the documentation and the processes that need to adhere to.
Sure. Let's talk about the third challenge before we get into some of the solutions. So, the third challenge is complex systems. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so it's really bringing together one and two into one challenge that we're experiencing. Some of these processes that's involved, whether it's on a production plant, whether it's providing power energy to our consumers and end users, it's all different OT assets that may be working together to deliver that service.
Sure.
And those may be slightly different from site to site. So understanding exactly how those complex systems work between one another allows us to triage and respond to issues in a much quicker fashion than if we were trying to just read through, say, a Visio diagram, a spreadsheet, or even just trying to get it out of some individual's tribal knowledge.
Yeah.
So trying to give that visual representation allows us to pinpoint issues and respond to them faster.
Absolutely, makes a lot of sense. So we've kind of laid out the challenges. We have poor visibility, loss of knowledge, and complex systems, right? And so everybody wants to know, but how? This is me. You have manufacturing leader X over at ABC Corporation. They're probably looking at this, saying, "Oh my God, I've been exposed. This is exactly what I'm facing right now." So if that is you, don't go nowhere because we got solutions for you. So let's get into some of those solutions. So solutions for the manufacturing sector around these common trends of challenges. You first talk about OT visibility. Talk to me about operational technology visibility. What does that mean?
Yeah, so I mean, historically, it has always been a challenge. So in the OT environment, we have what we call like Purdue levels. It's the different levels of technologies that's working in the OT environments. The higher levels, like your level fours and fives, they may be running on like standard operating systems that we typically experience in IT. So it's quite easy to get a representation of what those are using Discovery, using different third-party connectors. So we have a good history of being able to catalog and understand the relationships involved in that level. It's when you get down to Purdue levels like 3 and below, where things start to fall into those spreadsheets and tribal knowledge areas. And we want to try and get away from that and build out a foundational representation of those OT assets, grouping them by sites in our CMDB. And we're using the capabilities of OT visibility that really allows us to build out that foundational data set. We were looking to build out like a federated data model using Discovery for certain levels, but then relying on industry standard tools like a Dragos, a Clarity, an Armis. Some of these may be more of a passive scanner on those low levels to build out a representation of those OT assets.
Sure.
So understanding what I have allows me to then be able to perform actions against what I have.
I really like what you just said there. Understanding what you have helps you to create action against that. OT visibility, so this is not just a concept, but this is actually a feature within the technology. Do I have that right? And if you can kind of expound on that a little bit, it'd be great.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So ServiceNow goes to market with their OTM products, and one of those is the OT visibility SKU. So it operates very much like ITOM visibility, but it gives you additional service graph connectors to some of those common third-party applications that may be running within your OT environment. And so by using those service graph connectors, it's much more of like a turnkey solution to be able to get those OT assets into our CDB on a routine and dependable
Mm.
scheduled job.
Yeah, I love the relationship you talked about just now with ITOM and Discovery. That's really kind of crystallizes it. Let's talk about the second solution for the manufacturing sector, and that being visualized production processes. Share with us a bit more about that.
Yeah, so this is like still related to those OT assets. Realistically, what we're looking to do here is build out like that data model, but we still want to be building out with like industry standards in mind. So there's a ISA 95 that represents like the equipment data model within like the OT space. We want to adhere to that and want to build out all the different levels of the different OT assets that may be working together depending on consuming each other, so that we understand that if one asset is impacted, what kind of impact does that have to my production process or to that site? And we can then start prioritizing the kind of work that we want to do to triage against that process itself. So if something that may not be quite as revenue generating as another has been impacted, we know how we want to dispatch our work orders effectively.
I love this because we know that ServiceNow is indeed an investment. And what CFOs, C-suite executives want to understand is, where is the return of my investment? If I'm making this investment in this technology, how is this saving me money and making me more efficient down the line? When you talk about having this level of visibility and understanding these interrelationships, that makes things seem a lot closer to getting that return on investment and helping for C-suite executives to understand why this digital transformation is an imperative and not just a nice to have.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We don't really just want to become like a glorified spreadsheet,
Yeah.
which
Mm.
can often be done with like a CMDB. A CMDB is very very useful, but it has to have a use. And if we're not just building out pretty diagrams in a database here, we want to make sure that it's something that's going to become part of that system of action. So being able to sort of group that into the process, the site, allows us then to use like the OT service management capabilities and then some of the vulnerability response capabilities as well, and affect our prioritization of how we want to respond to them.
Yeah, yeah, love it, love it. Let's talk about the third solution for the manufacturing sector, that third one being vulnerability sector. Talk to me about this.
So this is probably the biggest pull that we have with a lot of the customers that we're working with today. Understanding what their vulnerabilities are
Yeah.
in these different OT assets. A lot of the equipment that may be residing on the plant floor, on the factory, substations, some of it can be quite dated, a little bit legacy equipment, but it works, so we don't need to necessarily replace it. But it may be dependent on certain running software installations on there that may have vulnerabilities. And without having an effective vulnerability management and response program, it's difficult for us to understand what's out there, what I need to respond to, and how to issue an engineer to somebody to go and patch and resolve that issue that's been experienced.
Yeah,
So this is where we start
definitely.
using the OTVR capabilities, using OT visibility, understanding everything that's installed and everything that's out there, cross-referencing that with like a OT vulnerability scanner, again, like your clarities, your tenables, your defender for OT, all of those VIs get ingested into to ServiceNow, and then we're going to respond to them effectively. And then from there, it's following so your patch management processes, how you're going to dispatch that person to go and triage that effectively. Or in a lot of regulations as well, we need to be able to document what our deferment plan actually is. So the reason why we may not be patching that on that exact date, the regulators want to know what decisions were made and why those decisions were made that way.
Yeah. Listening to you speak about this, it makes me think about, several manufacturing sector organizations that kind of come to mind. And I think about how may have been running in a certain way for a very long time. And so given that, there is definitely an embedded and assumed kind of pain of change environment, right? How are you able to navigate those kind of challenging waters of having the pain, the fear of change, while at the same time making sure that you're leading them down a path that's, the path to the promised land? What are those conversations like? What is that, not just the conversations, but what is that engagement like? And how can manufacturing sector organizations feel confident in the work and the outcome that you're going to provide?
Yeah, I think it comes down to that partnership. It is meeting them where they're at. What we often find as well is they don't want to change because it's working, but they're being forced to change, whether that's by pressure internally or whether it's by regulatory compliance that's pulling them forward. But we need to understand about their processes and how they actually operate themselves, because not every organization, not every industry is the same. So we typically see that a lot when it comes to, say, like the patch management workflows that we look to develop.
Hmm.
That's working very closely with them to understand what tasks, what steps, what approvals go into that. But we're still using the foundational data that comes from the visibility front, the VIs coming from the vulnerability scanner. It's how we then perform that work collectively to be able to respond to that open VI. So there's always going to be a little bit of resistance, but it's that good partnership that comes into it to make sure that we're building out a workflow that is going to be dependable, repeatable, and trustworthy over the long term.
Hmm. Yeah. So I know that you mentioned at the top of our conversation that you're a sales solution consultant with GlideFast and that you've helped many customers from various industries and kind of specializing in manufacturing. I'm curious from your view, how is GlideFast uniquely positioned to help manufacturer industries kind of, come up to speed in their digital transformation?
Yeah, no, great question. And I think we have a bit of a luxury of being involved in many different sectors in the manufacturing space. So whether that is working with product development, whether it's working with factories in the production line, or whether it's working with like the energies and utilities sector, we've worked directly with those customers and those different verticals to be able to leverage the ServiceNow OTM products and make them fit for what their problem statements and what they're looking to solve. And what I often say is that leveraging the CDB, that foundational data set, allows us to identify additional use cases that can be recognized as pain points for them. And so we talked a little bit about like being able to visualize those processes and those models. We've been able to do certain work with different groups where we've applied compliance rules and regulatory compliance to those models as well. So prior to them going onto the plant, onto the production line, they maybe want to test, vet, do their scans all in like in a sense, like a sandbox and getting that approval in place. ServiceNow is a perfect tool for that kind of workflow and task development. And then you have that audit trail of everything that's been accomplished. Our goal is to try and make it repeatable, make it easier, maybe fear those auditors a little bit less because you feel more confident in your data set and what you've actually performed from your testing ahead of time.
Definitely. Well, that's certainly a compelling value statement. I appreciate you sharing that, and I also appreciate your time. I know that you are going to be, you and I and Alan Hackman from ServiceNow, we're going to be in conversation at the end of the month. I'm going to tell the good folks that are watching this stream about that. But Mark Harper, Sales Solution Consultant at GlideFast Consulting, I want to thank you so much for your time.
Anytime. No, I enjoyed it. Thank you very much for having me on.
Thank you. Bye. Now
Appreciate it,
listen,
Callie.
don't you go nowhere. Don't you go nowhere. Now, Mark may be gone, but I'm still here. Don't go anywhere. So, listen, did you hear me just mention that Mark and Alan Hackman and I are going to be in conversation? Yes, I did say that. And I would love for you to join us. We're offering a free webinar, The Now of Manufacturing Trends, Automation, and Strategic Investment. So, this is going to be Thursday, May 30th. It's going to be a live webinar. You'll find the link in the comments section of this video. So that is something that you definitely don't want to miss. Would love to see you there, and tell a friend, right? Who do you know in your network that can benefit from this information? Would love for you to share this information with them. And next week, Thursday the 23rd, I'm going to be in conversation with Dale Stubblefield, Star-Lord, the Workflow Cowboy. Well, that was a bit of a tongue twister. He's going to be in conversation here, right here on 100 Days of Service. Now, did you happen to go to Knowledge, by the way? There was a lot of new features that was discussed and unveiled at Knowledge about creative workflow. So I could not think of anyone better to talk to about this than Dale Stubblefield. So you'll also find the link to this one. This one is posted in the description to this video. Listen, I'm Kylie Alexander. I want to thank you so much for joining me in this episode of 100 Days of ServiceNow. Did you know, by the way, that ServiceNow this year turns 20 years in the game. Man, ServiceNow has really exploded in these 20 years. I want to thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you next time. Be kind, stay curious. Bye.